All right, so I'll be discussing, this is a special discussion on, in particular, the perspective of the youth and why we fight and why we have to fight for the environment and for climate, and why the main call of my organization and personally is climate justice now. So this is a list of the general points of what we must fight for. And it's climate justice, the urgency of climate action, the defense of our environmental defenders, youth-led collective action, and lastly, system change. So we'll go through them one by one, but also in a more general way, because I want every single person who will be watching this in the future to understand what we can do on our level and what we should do and what, because this is something that affects everyone. And that's why we will talk first about climate justice. The previous discussions, I believe, is about what climate change is and how it affects the health and our personal lives. And that's why we recognize that if we don't do anything now, there is consequences to that. We recognize that it will lead to a global catastrophe, and that if we don't demand justice from corporations and governments who contributed most to the degradation of the environment, we will live in a world where we can't do anything about it anymore. So the accountability will come from is because of their willful ignorance to the climate crisis, and knowing that the cause of the climate crisis, which is carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, is caused by these corporations and governments. And that is why we call for climate justice. And climate justice isn't just a general, vague term, but it's something concrete, because we know that climate change affects social, economic, public health, and other kinds of impacts. And that's why we want the justice, which is the fair treatment of all people, and the freedom from discrimination when it comes to policies, projects that address climate change. These are the things that we call for. And additional to the fair treatment, we understand that the cause of climate change doesn't just come from everyone. There's a common but differentiated responsibility. We all have a role to play in addressing the climate crisis, and yet those who amounted to such large greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions, they have bigger responsibility than those of common people, those whose lives are just regular. We are not CEOs of corporations. Not everyone is the president of a country. These are positions that have very specific powers, and they have that large responsibility. That's why those who have benefited the most from destruction of the planet have the biggest responsibility. And we recognize that, because that's how we want to implement climate justice, because it must be justice, and it can't just be everyone everyone being blamed for causing the climate crisis. This is backed up by scientific evidence, as we see in these articles, that 20 firms are actually behind a third of the carbon emissions all over the world. And only the richest 1% create more emissions than the poorest half of the world. Now we can see here the division of the world's emissions, and how the majority currently is caused by the country, not the individual people, rather it's the country as a whole. And that is caused by the corporations that are in that country, or the production, the manufacturing that's being done in those countries. And the people benefiting from those manufacturing are few people in power. And that's why we turn to what we can do as individuals, knowing that the world is at risk. We know that the people, the governments, the corporations have to be held accountable for the climate crisis. The governments have obligation to protect our human rights in the face of the climate crisis. whilst polluting corporations are using every tactic to delay meaningful climate action. We cannot be hindrance by these entities, wherein we know that they are the ones who have the most power in creating that change. But at the same time, knowing that us, the people, together, we can also demand that accountability from them. And that's what climate justice is. Particular to my country, a bit of sharing will be, I'll be saying some stuff that is for the Philippines. We know that the more underprivileged populations have the worst impacts, and I feel like this can be relatable for a lot of different countries as well. When it's the poorest of the farmers, of the fisher folk, they're the ones who's experiencing the heat. They're the ones experiencing the drought. They're the ones experiencing the rising sea levels, where it changes their livelihoods. And that's why we need that fair treatment of all people and the freedom from discrimination. Because we know that these sectors, the different policies that contribute to that discrimination is a huge reason why the underprivileged populations are affected more. And moving to the second point, we know, mentioned as earlier, it was the reason why we have to do climate, we have to call for climate justice is because there is a deadline in the climate crisis. It is scientifically proven, and it was based on research that in the international report on climate change, it says that we have a deadline of 2030 before we reach a point where there's no return. The world will continue to rise in temperature, and if we don't have the emissions that we're doing right now as a world, we're going to reach that point. And we recognize that urgency based on science. We need that for informing and organizing the youth to lead the global action against the climate crisis. And that's why one of the calls as well, along with climate justice, is declaring a climate emergency as defined by the people, and have these concrete plans on addressing the current and possible effects of the climate crisis. The effects of the climate crisis can also be in the effect of not just the heat, not just the temperature or what we see, but it's also with the impacts that we lose, where it's the natural disasters, such as typhoons. It's the flooding that happens because of these typhoons, because of poor government planning, because of poor planning in the cities. It's these things that we need the most urgent action. And that's why we see, based on the report on climate change as well by the Intergovernmental Panel, is that we have to cut in fossil fuels. So that is the main cause of the climate crisis right now. So what we need to do is, one, to have clear plans, a step-by-step plan on how we remove fossil fuels. Secondly is paying off climate debt. Climate debt is essentially the debt that each country has because of the emissions that they're causing. And they have a lot of the countries such as the US, such as European countries, have a lot of that debt. It's the global north, the countries I mentioned earlier, paying off their debt towards the global south, or the countries who are still in they're still in their positions where they're still they still need assistance in when it comes to the adaptation of climate change. And fossil fuel phase out has to be global, and it has to come from these countries that have the most emissions. And that means just transition towards renewable energy. So what does that mean? In a lot of international conferences, because of international conferences organized by the United Nations, we see these countries agreeing that they need to cut off emissions, that they need to change their ways in order for us to protect our planet and in order for us to protect our environment. And so this is just more in the Philippines. And that's one of the things that as the youth we call for, because the governments have promised that they've said that they want to do this, they want to change, and yet we continue to still see the impacts of climate change in our country, such as these extreme weather events, the rising temperatures, and because of our experience in the recent pandemic, it's also a cause for emergency, because there's a risk for future pandemics when there's the rising land temperatures and potential pathogens that are released because of the melting ice that is happening currently because of the rising temperatures. So this is just a projection of what it will look like in a couple of years. And we're 2023, so it's only just less than 30 years from now that we see an increase of temperature and that change that will happen all over the world. And that change in temperature won't just affect humans, but it will also affect biodiversity. It will also affect animals and plants greatly, because the change in temperature will have to adapt. These animals and plants have to adapt to these change of temperatures and change of situation in their environment. And that will be a threat to a lot of food security, will also be a threat to the survival of many communities, especially those in far-flung areas. Speaking of far-flung areas, the third of the things that we must fight for, especially as youth activists or youth advocates, is the defense of our environmental defenders. As I was saying, that these impacts are experienced greatly by the people from the discriminated populations. Environmental defenders are the first to suffer from human rights violations because they're part of those who protect the environmental land and their ancestral land and the environment around them. My country, the Philippines, is one of the most dangerous countries in the world for environmental defenders, and that's because of the indigenous people that are being killed. Those are because of the farmers and the fisher folk that are being killed because of them protecting their land against the construction of mega dams, against the construction of airports, against the construction of like roads, because they're taking away their land, and because of large scale mining as well. The call for the stop for persecution is very important, because if there's no one calling for the protection of the environment, what will happen? The environment will be defenseless. The people who say that they protect them, that are fossil fuel corporations, such as Shell, Chevron, or even countries that say that they want to be green, they want to be sustainable, and yet their actions say the opposite. That's why one of the things that we also have to fight for is human rights, because it's our right to assemble, it's our right to speak up, it's our right to protect our rights. So our call for climate justice is not separate from the justice that we call for when it comes to those in the front line for the fight of our planet. So this is another case in my country, which is how protecting the environment is actually criminalized. So there's a documented 43 defenders that were killed in 2019. And because of legislation such as the Anti-Terrorism Act, it increases the risk against these advocates. And these are murders purely because they had to their land is being taken. And so they have to protect it. They must protect it, or else what can they do? And that is why from the defenders themselves, they call against these legislations such as the Anti-Terrorism Act and ensuring accountability for those who are the perpetrators of these murders, these crimes. And of course, the cooperation with human rights, the people who advocate for it, and those who are there to be watchdogs for our rights, such as the United Nations, and that we should support civil society, which who calls for the inquiry against for these violations. And fourthly, the importance of having action that comes from the youth. This is something that could be said that it's just the youth being loud, it's just the youth doing things they want. But really, the youth is being loud and being expressive because of their future. The youth will ally themselves because they know that the future is at stake. The youth will inherit the planet, and we refuse to inherit a dead planet. In that case, we know that it's not just us, it's our whole generation that is experiencing and will experience the future effects of climate change if we don't do anything about it. And that's why we say collectively, because it's not just students, it's not just the people that we know, but it has to come from different sectors. It has to be multisectoral, it has to be intergenerational, but it's being led by those who has the most at stake, because it's the struggle for the survival of our species. Today, the world is home to 1.8 billion young people between the ages of 10 to 24, the largest generation of youth in history. And we know, because of the internet, because of these forums, because of wherever you're getting your information, we're becoming more aware of the challenges that is presented by the climate crisis. And we know that those in power have failed, and we have to pay for it, essentially. It is the young who will experience the worst effects in the long term. And that's why you can only expect that the youth will take action. This is a quote from the United Nations, that young people are not only victims of climate change, they are also valuable contributors to climate action. They are agents of change, entrepreneurs, and innovators. Whether through education, science, or technology, young people are scaling up their efforts and using their skills to accelerate climate action. And I hope this is something that inspires us, because it's not just us who wants to learn more and wants to do more. Because we can see that young people all over the world are striking, all over the world are taking action for the protection of our planet, for the protection of the environment. You can see it here as different languages, different places, all over the world. The youth is here, and I hope everyone who's watching this, whether they be young or old, sees that the future is bright and that the youth will take action and will take care of the environment. These are photos from the Philippines. A few of them, all of them were organized by my organization. And of course, it's a huge opportunity and an honor to meet so many young people as well that are striking for the same thing and who are very passionate about protecting the environment. And that is why, last but not the least, the things that we should fight for is system change, because we recognize that the current global system that we have is wasteful and profit-oriented, and it's the main reason of why the climate crisis is here. The climate crisis wouldn't be here if we were sustainable about our production, and our production cannot be sustainable if it has the orientation that has to profit, because profit pushes us. It's the greediness of these corporations that continue to produce and produce, and even though it's too much, that these these industries that constantly heated the atmosphere, has led the disastrous changes in the climate. The reigning system of greed encourages corporations and governments to plunder the environment and generate massive amounts of waste. And for us to ensure that it doesn't continue that way, to ensure that we prevent global degradation, there must be a system-wide scale of change and action to transition to a pro-environment, pro-people planned and needs-based system. And this is why we see that the things that we do is necessary for it to be collectively, knowing that it's such a huge thing that we must change, and we can't do it alone. This is just a basis of like why the change has to come from the bottom, from the economy. So knowing that society is based has a material basis, and the economy actually influences the everything else: education, arts, politics, ethics, behavior. And we know that if we want to tackle the economy, we have to tackle the way it's oriented now. We have to do it with a lot of people, because currently the current system we have is a global monopoly capitalism. So this is what we're talking about when it's where it's profit oriented, it's greedy, because it has little regard for people and the environment. And this is of course also different from the way it was in the 19th century, because now it's monopolized, wherein it's only a couple of corporations who's in charge with so many brands. So this is the concentration of capital. There's super profits from the exploiting of people and planet. And then there's the overproduction that we see when it comes to clothes, when it comes to food waste, when it comes to the production of plastics. It's that kind of production that we see is the main cause of the climate crisis and the destruction of the environment. And lastly, it's one of the features it has is globalization, the way it's making countries into markets and making countries as sweatshops for the sake of profit. It disregards the rights of the people in different countries purely because one more powerful country wants to have profit. Okay, so these are more details towards these features. So there's a concentration of capital. I'm mentioning that it's the people that the top one richest people have more wealth and more emissions compared to the 50% poorest. And then there's the super profits when it comes to the production and extraction of natural resources when it comes to certain countries. As mentioned earlier, it's the overproduction, where it's as long as they meet the profit goals, it doesn't matter if there's a lot of waste that comes with it. So this is coming from the clothing corporations, with like fast fashion. Around 30% are never sold, and thus it just goes to waste. Like so much clothes go nowhere. They go to dump sites instead of going to the poor, instead of going to the people who actually need the clothes. And again, with globalization, it's the corporations making whole countries into markets, or exporting all the products to a certain country, because as long as someone is more powerful, they have the political control to access these markets and to access the natural resources. And what we were speaking about with system change, and that's why we say system change and not climate change, is that there must be an overhaul in the fundamental economic orientation of society. And because if we don't, the people in power will just continue to create the climate crisis. And because it's profitable, because as long as they get what they want, as long as their greed is satisfied, the climate crisis will continue. The current system is also the reason for the crisis character, in particular to countries who are who were colonized before, because the destruction of the environment and the exploitation of the people who were colonized before continues, but in different forms. It's through the poor living conditions, it's through the legislation that we have now. That's why the thing that we're calling for when we're saying system change, we want a system that is better. We need a system that is needs-based. We need a system that has democracy. We need a system that has green and genuine development. It can't just be a system that only thinks of a few, but has to think about the many. And that way, we can ensure that it's sustainable. We can ensure that we reduce emissions. We ensure that the marginalized groups have a say and people are respected in this system. And that is what we must fight for. I hope that those who listen to this talk can see that there's a lot more we can do as the youth, and that we have so much to fight for, because there's so many things that we can still change and we can do as the youth. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Coming days, it continues. So, with all the current scenario already present, the strategic actions that the indigenous youth can take. To try. So, first thing that I think that the indigenous youth could achieve is the first thing that the indigenous youth can do is actually to revive our ancient techniques and our practices. So, indigenous people have always lived by the norm that humans have responsibility towards all living things, and humans are interconnected with all other living things. All that breathes, all that grows is interrelated to humans. Going by this norm, it becomes a responsibility. Going by this norm, it becomes the responsibility of the indigenous people, especially youth, to take care of all other living beings, all other living creatures. Seven, three people. Since ancient times, our indigenous practices, our traditions have been deeply rooted in nature, and our lifestyle, way of living, has always been very deeply connected with nature, and it has been going on like together with sustainability of nature. So one thing that we could, as indigenous people, to revive our indigenous techniques, our food preservation techniques, our food culture, and our way of construction as well. The breeze that you can see in picture is a breeze that is made from the root of banyan tree. This system of building bridges has been practiced in Meghalaya of India by indigenous people for centuries. And this is a living bridge. It comes from the nature and it goes back to the nature, unlike the concrete bridges, and that is in a way harmful to humans also, and contains many other chemicals as well as or the byproduct of it. So next is green innovation. Talking about green innovation, uh, mm, currently there is a company, non-profit organization called Because International, and this company has produced an amazing product, which is called the growing shoes. This tool basically grows with the growth of the foot size of the children. Am I audible? You all? Now please do react. Maybe it could be a thumbs up or anything if I'm audible.
Yes, Titi, we can hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
so, yeah, I was talking about this green innovation, an amazing product called the growing shoes. And then, okay, talking about this, I would like to share an experience from my childhood. Like, there is a saying, I mean, like a question that is very popular among the locals of Kathmandu Valley, the capital of Nepal. That is between Hathi and Hathi Chap Tappal, which one is strong? Hathi basically means elephant here, and Hathi Chap is a brand. And this brand, this company produces slippers. So this slipper is very durable. I mean, like it used to be very durable. It was so durable that this question, whether the elephant or the elephant brand slipper is stronger, became a question among the people, local, the consumers of this brand. So the answer was that it is same. Like uh, when Hathi, the elephant stands on the Hathi Chap slipper, it cannot harm the sleeper. And when the Hathi Chap sleeper is put on the back of the elephant, likewise, it cannot harm the Hathi as well. But, you know, with capitalism, profitary nature, these kind of products have been like, in a way, disappeared from our market. So these kind of green innovatives that the current generation of youths are bringing is an example that can lead us to a greener world. And next is growing native plants. Like this generation is a generation that is focused more on aesthetics. So we want what looks beautiful, what looks appealing to us, and what is trendy. But this is not what our nature wants. So in order to revive the biodiversity, the fauna and flora of the local regions, growing native plants and increasing the bee population, protecting the bees that act as pollinators is a very important skill that we need to consider. So we have reports that say that the lichens around the lichens growing in the trees in our surroundings is decreasing very rapidly. And these lichens, they grow on trees in areas where the air quality is good. So this indicates the degrading air quality of our environment. And for us to bring back that, more native native plants that can actually thrive and grow in the environment needs to be introduced. And next is local produce in our food should be introduced. Our food has become like basically our stomach is becoming a junkyard. We are consuming food that are flown miles and miles away from different parts of the world, and the produce that are produced locally are going to the west, going to the dump yards. For example, in case of Nepal, apples of Jumla, they are very delicious, and it is like popular internationally as well. But because of the topography, they are a bit expensive compared to the apples that come from China. So what people do is they they opt for cheaper Chinese apples that is treated very much with pesticides and whatnot, all those chemicals to give them those color and glossy look. Because of this, the local produce of Jumla, the apples of Jumla, are being wasted. Similarly, vegetables of Sarai, recently, a few months ago, um, many protesters, farmers, uh, yeah, our friend already shared with us that the farmers and the people with low economic status are the first to suffer because of climate crisis. Uh, and uh, not just that, our farmers, our local people, the vulnerable groups are the first to suffer economically as well. Their vegetables were destroyed by the vegetables that were imported from foreign lands that were kept fresh using chemicals have been like a part of our food. So, in a way, when importing the food from faraway lands, we are increasing our carbon footprint. The vehicles, the aircraft, whatever we use to import our food is increasing the level of carbon gases, and it is not in any way helping us reduce the carbon footprint. Um, and our way of living is being like more oriented towards fast fashion, right? And then cheaper clothes that are harmful to nature are very much in trend, very much in demand, and we are foregoing very eco-friendly products, eco-friendly friendly fabrics, our local products like the uh, pure cotton clothes as well as hemp fabrics, the bamboo fabrics that use very less water and very less chemicals to be produced are like being neglected. We can incorporate those kind of fabrics in our we can incorporate those kinds of fabrics in our wardrobe in an attempt to reduce all those harmful uh, uh, chemicals being used in textile industry, as well as all and not all but many of our textile brands. And I have a picture of the mud house here. These mud houses are called breathing houses, and with growing temperature, these are the most suitable houses that regulate the temperature and keeps us warm during the winter and cold during the summer naturally without use of any kind of electronics like fans, ACs, or just. Sustainable living and conscious consumption is another way we can contribute to uh, climate justice. I mean, with sustainable living, a change in our lifestyle that is more eco-friendly, we can help reduce our carbon footprint by a lot. Next is we, as indigenous beings, indigenous youth, uh, staying connected to our indigenous spirituality helps a lot. I mean, like in indigenous practice, we believe that we are related to all living beings and all other things in the environment. And in a way, we worship. No, it it would not be wrong to say that we worship the nature. Our beliefs, indigenous beliefs that the water sources, the fire, and all other elements, 5 elements of the environment is a part of ourselves, help us keep our wetlands, our water resources protected. So being connected to indigenous spirituality also helps in reducing our carbon footprint. And we in Nepal we have a practice among the Chepang indigenous Chepang community in which Churi sapling is gifted. Churi is the Indian birthday tree. It is gifted to the bride during a wedding, and because of these norms, the Churi sapling is taken to the bride's home, planted, and by this the Indian butterfruit tree is plant is conserved throughout culture. And next is a practice called Belbi Baha. It is a practice among the indigenous Newari people of the Kathmandu Valley. This is a kind of ceremony in which a young bride marries a wood apple. It is not real marriage, but it's a ceremony in which wood apple gets married to a young indigenous Newari doll, so that she never has to be a widow in her life. Uh, so this culture also in a way helps the indigenous community to conserve the wood apple tree. It is considered a sin to let the wood apple die. So these indigenous practice is in a way preserving that variety of vegetation, and it is contributing to the local ecosystem. So I have interpreted a few pictures here. The third picture in which you see this round ball. This kind of ball is kept in front of all temples, and a small bowl is kept in front of all indigenous homes so as to feed the birds, Jersey birds in summer, and also the animals when there is shortage of water in the locality. And then there is this plate full of food. It's a biodegradable, compostable paper plate that is used in all Nepali ceremonies, all our festivals and feasts. Instead of using those like plastic plates that has become very common, the cutlery is used in indigenous communities made from very eco-friendly leaves. Yeah, and these leaves are commonly found, and because of this system, I mean, like in indigenous rituals, this leaf is very mandatory. Like if you are doing Bhumi Pujan or any kind of uh, ceremonies, rituals to worship the land, or during weddings or a birth of child, and also in death ceremonies, these kind of leaves are used. Leaf plates. It's very mandatory culturally. So this also helps us protect the local vegetation. Above is the picture of the Indian butter tree that I was talking about. And yeah, uh, next is permaculture and conscious farming. In a way, talking about the farming uh, nowadays in Tarai community, Tarai region, which is also known as Granary of Nepal. Yes, Helen, we can skip to the next slide. Which is also known as Granary of Nepal. People have planting their crops before the monsoon. As you know, season change is very unpredictable because of global warming. People are forcing their plants to grow before monsoon, like planting like that, and this has very much reduced the crop yield of the fertile lands and in a way vesting the land as well as fields. Farming consciously with local indigenous techniques like introducing friendly bugs like ladybugs that eat harmful insects and other other friendly farm friendly bugs. Introducing them will help us reduce the amount of pesticides and insecticides that we use in our fields and in our crops. Um, and urbanization is very much unmanaged, and because of this, we are losing our fertile land. So we indigenous people have always lived in close knit communities. Like there is a separate area for housing, and this protects our fertile land. So fertile lands are protected, conserved, and housing are managed with this practice, especially among the indigenous Newara community. If our city planning government officers planning the urbanization of cities would adopt this indigenous practice of separating housing areas and like farming areas, agricultural lands, and this will also very much help us to uh, grow our crop yields as well as protect our fertile lands. And by banning the sorting system that cuts the fertile land into many smaller pieces so that it will be used for uh, construction would also help us. Like, I mean, by having a proper plan to protect our fertile lands, agricultural lands, and having a separate system that is that has been in practice in our indigenous communities for centuries, then our lands would be protected. And next is that, that polluter pays principle has never been in practice, and big corporations and very developed nations that are actually creating more than 90% of the pollution or the climate crisis are not being responsible for these. We as indigenous people have to take action and take policy making roles. Like we have to participate actively in policy making. Like what we tend to do is we stay miles and miles away from politics. Like it has been ingrained in every young mind that politics is a dirty game, but it is not true. Like by not being involved in politics ourselves, I mean, like good people not being involved in politics and not taking action in policy making is actually giving opportunities to bad people that we consider as dirty politicians a chance to be in power and to do whatever they want to do, like you know, be dictators in economy. So as aware indigenous people, aware youth, it becomes our responsibility to take part in policy making activities. And next is we have our land reform policies, indigenous land reform policies, and also the rights that the ILO, sorry, and the rights that the ILO as well as United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People has provisions like incorporated in those conventions and conventions and protocols. Like we must fight to get those rights. And like they are just in paper, like in documents, but we are entitled to have those rights. We are entitled to be donated for our land, to be compensated for our indigenous land, and to be and for our indigenous land rights, customary land rights to be recognized. So uh, this being safe, being aware and making others aware of their rights is what we should be doing. not just as an indigenous youth, but every youth has has a responsibility to make every people aware that climate crisis is real. I mean, like many people don't even know what climate crisis is, and it is very sad. So it is our responsibility to make people realize, to make people aware that climate crisis is real, and we have to take action to stop the climate crisis and to ensure climate justice. And to do this, we have to bring change in our way of teaching children. Like it has become a norm to teach children that the waste generated uh, by us must be thrown in a dustbin. But we never teach them that, if possible, we should reduce the waste and live a sustainable life. Like sustainable lifestyle should be the new teaching and of the coming generation. We should not just be teaching them where should we manage, but we should be teaching them zero waste life is possible. This is all. Thank you so much, everyone, for the time.